At Wyn Jones, we believe in innovation. Innovation refines, improves, and revolutionizes. We believe in recognizing innovation and those who innovate. Innovation drives us, even if we are unaware of it. We believe that innovation should be rewarded. At Wyn Jones, we have more than 50 years' experience in helping businesses achieve their goals. From concept to commercialization, we are right there with you. We help our clients harness their ideas and harvest their inventions, providing strategic insights into competitor activity and, most importantly, protecting their assets. We know that your intellectual property is your crown jewels. Wales is a hotbed of technology and innovation. The COVID-19 pandemic has thrown medicine and healthcare into the spotlight of the global stage. Personalized medicine and predictive healthcare technology is one of the fastest growing modern industries, and Wales pioneers here. Demand on healthcare resources continues to rise. However, the tools are becoming ever more advanced, leading to better results and better efficiency. Patient care is being driven forward by data-led initiatives, digital technology, advanced pharmaceuticals, and medical inventions, and their role is only set to increase. We are also living the cyber revolution, and Wales sits at the forefront of technology, hyperconnectivity, and artificial intelligence in this cyber era. The landscape is rapidly evolving, and we are proud that Wales are navigating these challenges and innovating in ways never seen before by our global predecessors. Here at Wyn Jones, we're proud to be dedicated to helping you push those boundaries. We need to keep on innovating, but innovation needs to be sustainable. Sustainability protects our ecosystems, human and ecological health, and natural resources. And we know that intellectual property and sustainability don't always sit neatly together. Sustainability is critical for the health of our planet, our people, and our economies, and innovating has never been more challenging. But it's a challenge that Wales and Wyn Jones IP are happy to meet. We are delighted again to support Wales Tech Week, and this year sponsor the Smart Stage. The festival was a huge success last year and provides information and resources for those across a range of different technologies and sectors. The week showcases technology in Wales at its best, and we are proud to support it. Join us this week at our events and during panel sessions. Please also drop by our virtual expo booth and feel free to get in touch. Thank you.
Welcome to Wales Tech Week 2021. Thank you to our partners. Enjoy the session.
Hello there, everyone. Croeso chi gyd am mynd i heddiw. Welcome to all of you for joining us today. We will be taking you through what we think smart information is. We have a number of talks, and I hope you'll join us for this session so we can tell you all about what we think this challenge brings to us all and values. And we go through this and introduce the session to you. So we're going to be talking about what we think smart information is. We've got a number of speakers coming up. I'll be giving us setting the scene, if you like, to begin with. And then we have our CTO at Capventis, Mike Hawkes, who will be telling us about how we can derive insights from our smart information. That's our first talk. We will then go to Matt Tanner from Dgraph Labs. He will be telling us about how we can turn siloed data into real-time intelligence with Dgraph. So these are intelligent, smart things we can do with our information. And then later on, we will be going into a panel discussion with Mike and Matt, and we'll be joined by Mark Makin, Director of Spontza, and Peter Sueref, CTO founder of Empirisys, and Jamie Cudden, who is the Smart City Lead from Dublin City Council. So that's our agenda for today. Please stay with us and join in with the chat as well. Ask questions as you go along, and we'll try and get those in at the end of each of the speakers. So the first question I want to ask really is, just to set this scene, what is smart information? What do we mean by this? If you look this up, you will get this definition, or one of them. There's some debate about what this actually means. So we want to be specific, we want to measure things, we want whatever we're doing to be achievable, we want it to be relevant, and it's going to be time sensitive as well. I'm not going to go into this in detail, that's our speakers' task. They're going to be looking at this and diving into what this might mean for us. What I'm going to start off with is just setting the scene a little bit. So you may have come across this triangle of data, information, knowledge, and wisdom, commonly known as DIKU. I'm going to start down here, though. We have an awful lot of this. And I'll go into a little bit about this in a second. We have an awful lot of data being gathered from all sorts of places these days. Mike and Matt will talk about some of the examples of this. Above this, though, we have this triangle of information, knowledge, and wisdom. And is this the smart bit? Is this what we mean by being smart with our information? That's the question I'm posing. There's a lot of blurry lines between these. If you look around on, try and research this topic, there's disagreement about what these different layers of this triangle mean. But does it really matter is another question I want to bring to the table. Arguably, it's the thing at the very top of this that matters, and I'd propose that's where the value comes in. So our panel discussion later on is titled, deriving value from your smart information. That's where I think we should be focusing. From our data, how do we get value? That, I think, is how we can be smart with our information. So that's the proposition for today's session. Back to this, though, the data. Let's start with the bottom bit. I want to set the scene about what we might have in that layer down there. So where are we doing this? Where are we doing our piece of work? And we're going to be doing this. We're building a team up in Emspark in North Wales. Michael mentioned that in a minute as well. This is the lovely building that we're going to be building our team out of to do our work. We have a wonderful community up here. I'm one of the co-founders of this community, and we get hands-on with the technology, which is for gathering the data. Here's some examples of this. These are projects that some of the community out here, in fact, they're Emspark co-tenants with us, and they're out in the field. That's a rain gauge on the left there, and some sensors that have been put out into the field to gather this data that we're talking about. There's another interesting about North Wales here. One of the networks for gathering these pieces of information, be it in a city or in a rural area, is this Things network. It's a crowdsourced network for gathering information from devices that started in the Netherlands, and it's all over the UK, as you can see in this map. But there's an interesting point here. If you look at the numbers there, if you look at the numbers around London, for example, the 23, the 58 that you can see down the bottom here, but look into North Wales. There's a very big spike up there. We've got 48 of these network gathering stations, if you like, data gathering stations in North Wales. And that's largely off the work our community have done and the community that's coming out of Emspark. So this is one of the reasons that it's so compelling for Capventis to come to North Wales. The parent company is over in Ireland in Dublin. It's just across the Irish Sea. And I'll explain a bit more about what's going on over here. If you drill into this, you'll see that there's quite a few of these data collection points around. They're run by local councils. They're run by companies with specific agendas with energy or agriculture. But there's quite a lot going around. One of these examples, which I'm involved in as well, is a local energy project where these graphs are showing us our real-time energy consumption for our community, not an individual household. This isn't my data. This is the data for the entire community that I live in. And there are projects like this going on all over North Wales and across Wales in general, actually. This is one of the exciting things about Wales Tech Week. You'll be hearing about lots of these in the other sessions, I'm sure. But these are award-winning and newsworthy stories that are cutting edge of gathering information, gathering the data. We haven't derived value from it yet. We haven't broken it down. This is the first step, gathering this information, this data. We're doing this with cutting edge technology as well. We have companies in the area that are gathering information with drone technology for agriculture and tourism. We have real world problems like massive challenges when it comes to managing the influx of tourism that's come from the staycation craze. We have real challenges to try and face in this area. And we have more pleasant ones as well. Keeping track of the wildlife, some of it rare wildlife, is a real challenge that we need to address to protect this wonderful part of the country that we live in. So I'm hoping that's setting the scene a little bit for the kinds of data that we might be gathering and why we might be interested in doing so. I'll pass over to Mike and Matt now to dive deeper into this. So our first talk from Mike Hawkes, our CTO, is about deriving insights from smart information. And I'll pass over to Mike now. That's our first video.
COVID and its impact on the entire tech sector. I think it's almost impossible to talk about smart information without referring to COVID and its impact on the entire tech sector. While I had continuity plans for fires, floods and earthquakes, I didn't have a global pandemic or international legislation forcing the closure of all of our offices on my plans. These are genuinely exceptional times. While COVID has had a devastating impact on the leisure sector, I've seen a boom in the tech sector as companies have had to adopt cloud services and remote working. In some ways, COVID has transformed the workplace. The likes of Tomorrow's World back in the 1970s predicted that we would all be working from home by the 2000s. We missed that target, and many corporates resisted that change. And if there's one benefit from COVID, it's that it has brought remote and more flexible working into sharp focus. I've seen recent discussions and press releases showing that many financial institutions are ditching offices in the cities and giving workers the ability to work from home permanently. The likes of Teams and Zoom saw a massive increase in subscriptions. And I think we're now all used to seeing somebody's child, dog or cat interrupting meetings. It's brought a whole new level of humanity into the office. Looking at our costs, particularly expenses, I have seen a dramatic improvement in the cost of sale and productivity figures. Pre-COVID, I would often spend 2 to 3 hours commuting into the city, have a pre-meeting in the office, and then trundle off to see a client. We then do the whole thing in reverse, meaning that I've spent an entire day out of circulation to do a single 1 to 2 hour meeting. If we factor in international flights, bringing in other members of the team, and the reciprocal impact on the client side, relatively simple meetings end up costing us a fortune. We already had a plan to move many of our core systems into the cloud. However, with COVID, we couldn't even get into our offices, so we needed to speed up that migration. Nearly all of our systems now sit outside of our own infrastructure. We are fortunate in that we develop migration and integration technologies. This allowed us to move into the cloud with proper synchronization and orchestration of data between these otherwise disparate environments. COVID forced us to use the technology we have developed, the stuff we provided to our customers for years. And this actually gave us a very different perspective on our development priorities and technical direction. So, COVID forced us to look inwards, and that helped us streamline our costs and improve efficiency. On the first lockdown, tourists flocked to our national parks. This caused chaos. Here in North Wales, tourists blocked all of the primary arteries running through Snowdonia. Some tourists even went as far as trying to break into attractions closed due to the pandemic. Police had to close roads and turn people back in order to regain control. This exposes a big hole in all things smart. Thinking about the whole landscape for a moment, we have sensors recording how many people come in or go out of a particular attraction. We have traffic management systems capable of tracking the current situation on our transport networks. We have public transport ticketing systems, along with predictive analytics helping to define future demand. We also have health systems, albeit somewhat disjoint, and we have billions of data points captured via social media and mobile communication systems. Yet, even with all of this data, we lack the ability to track and trace citizens going about their normal business in an anonymized and secure way. We need technologies in both public and private sector to come together, and we need to be able to do this in real time. Luckily, we are seeing a new breed of technology on the horizon. Massively capable and hugely scalable, these new technologies will help drive faster and better analytics, improve our ability to predict events, and reduce our carbon footprint. When we capture data from the real world, we have to consider its relevance at any given point in time. For example, the number of people waiting in a phone queue has an immediate impact on call centre resources. However, unless you need to drill down into specific events, only the total number of people and maximum and minimum values have use beyond the time when the data was originally captured. Then we perform some kind of analysis on the totals to give mean time to answer, mean time to problem resolution, and perhaps analyse which of the call centre staff can close issues the fastest or have the highest CSAT. For our retail customers, predictive analytics can use this captured data to predict things like increases in call densities on the run-up to public holidays, or expected ticket sale volumes based on similar historical events. So time has a fundamental impact on the value of data at any given point in time. We need to understand when a value was captured and when that same value was processed. This then allows us to synchronize data across many systems. Knowing which values were updated, on which system, at what time, gives us the ability to orchestrate data flows and ensure that all connected systems share the same version of the truth. Note here that I've said version of the truth, because for most real-world systems and sensors, we're only capturing a measurement of something at a particular point in time, and that value may well have already changed by the time the analytics tools report on them. So here we are, capturing data points, and in a smart world, we collect lots of the stuff. This data, collected from sensors, forms the mainstay of what we call operational data. Our operational data provides us with insights to allow us to improve business processes, make savings, and increase efficiency. Operational data on its own, however, misses a huge part of the picture. In our customer-centric world, we need an additional set of measurements, and these measurements come from asking customers about their experience. As an example, let's consider an international tyre manufacturer. If we ask the right questions to the end customer, we can find out all kinds of information that the manufacturer can use to help improve or streamline services. We ask questions such as, was the tyre in stock? Or if you had to order it, did the right tyre arrive? Was it fitted on time? How do you rate the information given to you to help select this particular brand? And perhaps most importantly, would you recommend us to your friends? These questions actually provide a view across the entire manufacturing and distribution network. If the tyre wasn't in stock, then there could have been an issue with the manufacturing, distribution, or stock management processes. If the customer ordered a tyre and the warehouse delivered the wrong one, then we have a potential issue with the stock ordering process. Or we can improve dealer training to reduce the number of these incidents in the future. If the customer had no issues and the tyre was fitted on time to the right specification, then perhaps it's reasonable to assume that the entire chain has worked as expected. But what if the customers consistently fail to recommend a specific dealer? Perhaps then that dealer should no longer form part of your distribution and sales network. In our world, we call this experience data. Experience data has a massive impact, and insights derived from it can have a fundamental effect on the way that we conduct business. I'll give another example. We might want to apply sentiment analysis to information provided by a customer to our support systems. In banking and insurance support centres, we might measure perceived stress levels in the voice to detect fraud or anxiety. In ticketing systems, we often analyse text to determine whether a customer is happy, sad, or angry. If we measure that same customer's responses when an issue has been closed, it should show a positive change from the original sentiment presented to the system. However, we have to be very careful about drawing conclusions from sentiment analysis and artificial intelligence systems. For the recent US elections, I ran my own predictive model to see if I could determine which of the candidates would win the election. I analysed social media, tweets, Instagram, Facebook, and so on. Partway through the campaign, Donald Trump caught COVID, and my predictions began to swing wildly. When I started to look for the reasons for these sudden swings, I found comments along the lines of, "The man's an idiot, but I wish him a speedy recovery." So we have to ask ourselves whether that's a negative or positive sentiment overall. The sentiment analysis engine I was using at the time suggested that, on balance, that comment should be positive. In its terms, the first part was entirely negative. The man is an idiot. And then we had the verbal eraser, the word but. And that was followed by, "I wish him a speedy recovery." In this particular case, the word but swung the balance in favour of a positive from a neutral score. Here then we can measure and collect experience data from social media channels, but we have to make sure that we understand the impact of the algorithms we use on it. So we find ways to collect data from our operational systems, operational data, and we use sentiment analysis or surveys to gather our experience data. But what do we do with it all? This is a fundamental problem in all smart environments. We have data, and we have lots of data. In fact, we have so much data that we struggle to deal with it. I'll go as far as to say that we have a mind-boggling, absolutely huge amount of data available to us today. As we walk with our mobile devices and wearables, we hemorrhage data, and yet only a few systems know how to farm or harvest it properly. We need mechanisms that allow us to bring all of this data together in a controlled way. We need systems that can help us search for information. And we need the search systems to present real information that we can actually rely on. Unfortunately, social media platforms often provide an echo chamber where irrelevant or misleading information finds a voice. In the current systems, it's usually these or those with the deepest pockets that appear at the top of the list, and that needs to change. In an ideal world, search engines should provide us with usable data, maintained by its authoritative data subject. In other words, if people search for a thing or an event that I own, my data and my presentation of it should appear at the top of the list. It's my stuff, and I have a vested interest in making sure that it's right. If handled correctly, this approach benefits all parties. I can register interest in the things I want to see or know about. Companies and brands get direct engagement from the people or organizations they want in their network, and their marketing and targeting hits their ideal market. By that I mean they're not wasting money on blanket advertising. It's time perhaps to reassess search. Time to bring all of this data together. SMART originally stood for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Information I define as the result of processing data. To that end, I think it's time to embrace the basic ethos of smart information. But I want to do it using the latest advances in technology. If I've got a car coming into Snowdonia, I'd like to be able to help those tourists find the right event at the right location at the right time. If I can minimise the carbon footprint because they're not waiting in a queue of traffic for half an hour near to an overpopulated attraction, then surely we should do it. I'd like to help people find relevant information, not by creating massive indexes or mindlessly copying data, but by linking to it and keeping data in place, connecting real data with intelligent links. Again, saving the carbon footprint by reducing the number and size of data centers required. I want to make information accessible and controllable. This then is where we start to see a glimpse of the future. In a smart world, we should have easily consumed application programming interfaces, or APIs, where services can share information. By providing modern and efficient interfaces, we can combine public and private sector data to give an unprecedented level of insight. Imagine for a moment accessing a system that tells you what's happening in a particular area. It also tells you how to get there, taking the current traffic situation into account, while knowing where to find local accommodation, where to eat, where to charge the car, book the hydrogen-powered bus tickets, and, since we're online, where I can leave the cat, dog, or children. In most of this, those managing the smart cities have the predictive analysts show how I'm likely to be consuming a car parking space, when I'm going to require public transport and accommodation in a particular region. We can now complete the loop. My attendance tips the balance. For the next inquiring person, the system knows that my car has filled the car parking space, that the attraction has hit its capacity, and that there are no free places left in the cattery. As a result, the children shows, amongst other things, where the next visitor can enjoy the area by doing something else. We've managed the traffic to reduce congestion and the associated carbon footprint. We've eased congestion by balancing out the most and least popular attractions and made sure that the emergency services can get to critical areas without having to tow cars out of the way. Artificial intelligence and machine learning systems can generate a lot of this type of insight. However, I would like the systems to really understand the context for any given query. At the moment, I have to perform multiple searches across several systems, and even then I may well end up bombarded with irrelevant adverts or premium content. The next big step in technology will be the development of systems capable of supporting the context to put real insight into your hands. And this is what we're developing out of MSpark today. I feel like I should have started this keynote with, "I have a dream." And if I did, I would summarize it as follows. COVID has taught us that when we embrace technology, we can work in a totally different way. Companies transformed the way they worked in just a few weeks. But we'll be seeing a positive long-term effect in everything, from working practices to the migration and better computing platforms. If we link operational and experience data using highly scalable and flexible systems, We can search through petabytes of data in milliseconds to find exactly the information we seek, but without the noise. Done right, we also become the owners of our own data. We're developing systems out of MSpark here on Anglesey with global partners. In the post-COVID world, it's as easy to grow a business here as it is in the cities. But we get a better quality of life, and it's much better for the environment too. We bring together the smart information family, bringing data, whether that's in health, transport, power generation, or even retail, together. I'd like to invite you to take the plunge and start becoming a user of smart information. It's genuinely transformative. In our presentations today, we're showcasing a few of the technologies within our portfolio. Some from our partners and some that include our own Glue platform. I'll be joining the panel and coming back to finish things off later. Please stick around. I think you'll find it interesting.
Thank you very much, Mike, for that. We are now going to go into our next guest speaker, and Mike mentioned there are petabytes of data. If you have an awful lot of data and you're trying to make sense of it, you're going to need some pretty heavy-duty technology, which we're building, and funnily enough, our partners over at Dgraph are also working on. So let me introduce our next speaker. It's Matt Tanner, who's going to tell us about the challenges of... bear with me one moment there. The challenges of... bear with me one moment there. I do apologise for that. There we go. Technical difficulties. Matt Tanner, who's going to be telling us about turning siloed data into real-time intelligence with Dgraph. So we can play that video now.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this brief talk on turning siloed data into real-time intelligence with Dgraph. My name is Matt Tanner. I am a developer advocate and a solution architect at Dgraph Labs, and yeah, I'll be walking through this with you today. Our first stop is taking a look at what siloed data is. So when we talk about real-time intelligence, siloed data is really, the demon that stops us from being able to do that. So siloed data is data in multiple databases, multiple data sources, and usually this happens because application data is kept in a single place. So one application, one database, another application, another database. We use this concept for years, really, within most organizations. As we built applications, we just created new databases for them. This causes an issue, though, because data is not interconnected in this state. We may have applications with data that could be linked together and probably give us really good insights, but because it's separate, we're not able to do that. And another thing is that if we're building applications that do need data from another database, it means that those applications have to retrieve that data from multiple sources. This can lead to longer development times. It also leads to just more application complexity in general. Now, the way that we can improve things and improve our businesses and improve the insights that our organization can leverage is through data unification. That's the process of ingesting data from multiple sources into a primary repository. And that's kind of the textbook tech definition of it. What it really means is we want to be able to find everything in one place. Okay? It means that we should have a single source of truth. We shouldn't have to go to a bunch of different databases in order to get the data we need. We should be able to go to one spot. That requires us to bring all application and enterprise data into that single database. And this can be a little bit of a task, as many of us probably know. There's a reason why we haven't went this route. It's a tough thing to do. It's a tough thing to implement. But going this route is really the only true way to gain insights from our enterprise-wide data. And then we start to talk about real-time intelligence. And we absolutely need data unification in order to get real-time intelligence. It's kind of the pinnacle of modern big data. And that is, like, this whole notion is driven by the fact that we need to be able to gain insights from data instantly. We need to be able to react to events as they occur or as they're detected. And this allows users to access data precisely when they need it. Beyond those words, what does it really mean? What kind of use cases could we derive from this? Well, let's just say someone applies for a new bank account at one of our financial institutions. It would be great if we could accurately recommend products to them based on a huge amount of data points. Now, we've been able to do this. Absolutely. We have financial institutions, we have insurers that are out there that are able to recommend this kind of stuff. But is it really that accurate? We think it is, but what if we had more data? With more data comes more accuracy, but generally with more data comes less speed with our traditional systems, right? We think about when we have millions and millions of records that we're parsing through, how could we possibly do that in maybe a nanosecond or a millisecond? Quick enough in order to give someone the product that they need without making them wait too long for it. Well, that's where you want to gain real-time intelligence. Or maybe you're running a fraud detection system where we don't want to learn about fraud in a minutes, weeks, or days. We need to know about it almost the instant that it happens. We can do that with real-time intelligence. And what kind of platform would support that? Well, we're going to get to that. But first, I want to look at how we traditionally do this. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with these approaches, because all the organizations that I have worked for have used these approaches. It just means that real time is much tougher to do. It's not truly real time. And this was the original big data approach. When we look at it, we think of, when I think of big data, I think of Hadoop. We have a bunch of these batch data feeds and services dumping into this giant data lake. And then we have very complex queries that most of us mere mortals cannot write. We need data scientists or data architects to do that. And that's going to require specialist knowledge. And then the cherry on top is the fact that it might take hours, days, or even weeks to be able to churn out the insights that we need. If we're doing fraud detection or product recommendations, that's not really something that we want. We want something that we can do right away. Now, from my experience, maybe if we're looking at delinquency in financial institutions, maybe we can do that, because whether it takes 1 or 2 days in order for us to figure out, the chances of someone being even more delinquent on something, if we're 1 or 2 days late on that, that's probably okay. It's probably not a huge loss to us. But if we're talking about being able to maybe retain a customer or make more money off a customer to give them services that are going to bring more value to them, we might want to be able to do that instantly. And that is where we want to take a more modern approach to it. To us, that modern approach is Dgraph, which stands for Distributed Graph DB. That is what our company's name is derived from. It's an open source graph database. And if you haven't heard of graph databases before, don't be scared. I actually did not know much about graph databases until just before I actually joined Dgraph. So very easy to pick up, and the amount of value that they can bring is kind of astronomical. It allows you to create relationships within the data that's more deep than what you'd see with a traditional SQL or NoSQL database like MongoDB. A lot of those systems mean that you have to do a lot of manual work in order to define those relationships, whereas we can do it in a little bit more of a autonomous fashion with a graph database. And every single piece of data in a graph database could be almost infinitely linked to any other piece of data within the database. And when you look at some of the visualization tools that come with a graph database, it's pretty cool. You can drag, some piece of data maybe across the screen, and you'll actually see all of these data points where it's connected to. And those are the kind of data points that you need for real-time intelligence to derive those insights. Now, even though we're talking about extremely large data sets, we're still talking about very, very minimal amount of time in order to get responses back. So if I run a query across millions of data points, I can get that back possibly in nano or milliseconds. It's absolutely incredible how fast a system like this can run and pull back that data. Now, one concern that you may have is, hey, if I'm using something like a graph database and I'm taking all my data and dumping it into this giant, data lake, will the performance start to degrade after I, with years of dumping, maybe terabytes of data into this, or maybe even petabytes of data? No, the answer is no, it's not going to. So performance is actually maintained with scale on this because of the way that the relationships are created within the data. Now, when we put it in practical terms, when we're trying to implement something like this, how would we create real-time intelligence with Dgraph? Well, I'm going to give you the kindergartner breakdown of exactly how you would do that. If I had to explain this to, my grandmother, this is exactly how I would say we need to do it. So if you want to take that next-gen approach to big data, what you need to do first is identify your data sources. And if we're experienced with traditional big data approaches, we know this can take a while. We may have thousands of applications with thousands of databases. We need to determine what those data sources are and how we're going to get that data towards Dgraph. Then what we'll do is we'll actually connect that data to Dgraph. So whether we batch stuff into it or whether we actually create pipelines in order to get this data to Dgraph, we need to connect that data into Dgraph. Once it's there, this kind of web of data is going to be created. And from that, we can actually start to query and gain insights from that data instantly. So the cool part about Dgraph is that there's really not much tuning that you need to do compared to a traditional database. But you get this, next level performance out of it. And the cool part is that the query language that we use is not really complex at all. We're able to bring out really, really complex intelligence and insights from a query language that, to me, is, very accessible to most of the technology community. Even though, other graph databases may tend to have something that is a little more complex, it takes a little more to learn. We really pride ourselves in being able to make this real-time intelligence and this graph approach accessible to folks that maybe didn't have access to it before. What does it look like in action? Well, here is a simplified picture of what the 1,000-foot view would look like for it. I don't want to say 10,000 foot because it would look a little different than this. But 1,000-foot view would be, we've got our databases over here. That data from those databases or data silos is then getting funneled into the Dgraph cloud platform. Now we do have enterprise on-prem as well for more highly regulated industries. But right now we're really pushing heavily towards cloud because you can get going in just a matter of minutes, actually. So we have this data coming in, we have it coming into our graph platform, and from that, we can then, microservices could access that. So if you've heard all the buzzwords, I'm sure you've heard microservices. If you're using microservices, you can get an entire picture of your organization's data, just like that. If you're a user, or whether you're an application, whether you're another service, you could also use the information, that data that's going to be then connected into Dgraph too. So these are all our data sources over here, and this is our end users or end services that are ingesting that data. Real world use cases. Here's a few that we've had clients and users use our systems for. So we've had people use it for knowledge graph, which really is derived from that Google big data problem. Master data management. customer 360, where an enterprise wants to know, okay, we have all this data. How can we form a better picture of our customers so that we can recommend better products and really bring more value to that customer? That is customer 360. And then we have identity and access graphs, which kind of plays into that fraud detection portion, possibly. There's lots of different use cases within that. And social network graphs, which is the original kind of use case for a graph database when I think about, the epitome of graph database usage. Social networks like Facebook are extremely interconnected within their data, and they need to have a solution like a graph database in order to manage that. So imagine if you could bring that power into your organization. Think about how great Facebook and Twitter and all these social media platforms are at being able to have this user predictability. You can bring that into your organization too. And one thing that I do want to mention that's not here is the fact that Dgraph and graph databases are really a truly multi-use type of database. You could use it for a very small project, or you could use it for a very large project. It's one of the few components in technology that have, whether you're at home playing around creating a mobile application or building a small startup, you could use Dgraph. Or if you have, one of the oldest organizations in the world, being most financial places, you could also use it there and put in, a massive amount of data and get a massive amount of insight from that data. So you could bring in a database, kind of one database to rule them all. That is one way to look at a solution like Dgraph. All right, and that is the end. Hopefully that gives everyone a little bit of thirst for what they could possibly do with something like a graph database. And if you do have any questions, I'm happy to take those at matt@dgraph.io. And if you're looking for a path to start with, I'm also happy to guide you on that as well. Thanks again for joining. And if you do want to learn more about the company, we have all of our stuff on YouTube, Twitter, GitHub if you want to check out our code. And we also have LinkedIn as well, where we share articles and other insights within the real-time analytics and real-time intelligence community as well. Thank you very much for joining, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Matt. Some wonderful technology there, and it's enabling us to do things that maybe weren't previously possible. So that was Matt talking about turning siloed data into real-time intelligence with Dgraph. So our next session is the panel discussion. So we'll be entering this in a moment. We have 5 guests, both our speakers, Mike Hawkes and Matt Tanner, will be joining us again. And then we have Mark Makin, Managing Director of Spontza. We have Peter Sueref, CTO founder of Empirisys. And we have Jamie Cudden, Smart City Lead from Dublin City Council. So if I can ask our production team to add everybody into the session, we can get started. There we go. Welcome everybody. Please make sure you're no longer on mute. Let's see. Hopefully everybody's joining in, and I think Matt, you're on mute perhaps. Thank you. So first of all, let me welcome you all to the session. We have some pre-prepared questions, but I'm really keen to make this as organic as possible. So please do ask each other's questions and have a proper conversation about these topics. But before we do that, though, let me just introduce everybody briefly. So if I can ask you all to explain your interest in being smart with our information. So what your connection to this topic is, and just briefly, because we want to get into the discussion, I'll give you more time to talk about that later. So if we start perhaps with, I'll go in the order I've got you. So Mark Makin, can I ask you to just briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Mark Makin. I'm the Managing Director of Spontza. We are in the space of the sponsorship, partnership and collaboration world, whereby everything that we're working towards right now is designed to use smart information to bring audiences together, but to also empower people in terms of the way they search for the information they want and need today. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Brilliant example. I'll go next to Matt. So we've seen you speak a minute ago. If I'll let you just introduce yourself briefly. We've seen your fantastic talk, so off you go.
Sure, yeah. My name's Matt Tanner. I am a developer advocate and solution architect at Dgraph. And my connection to, being smart with your data is the fact that our technology is actually kind of underpinning that pretty heavily. So, as we see more clients want to move out and leverage data differently, our platform allows them to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. And if you do need to get in touch with Matt after his talk earlier, we'll put the details in the end as well. Next on my list here is Jamie Cudden. Thank you so much for joining us, Jamie. It's fantastic, the work that you're doing over there. But can I ask you to introduce yourself and explain your connection to this topic as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Delighted to be here today, joining the panel session. So I'm Jamie Cudden. I lead the Smart City programme in Dublin City Council. So my role really is to look at new emerging technology and look at how we can, I suppose, trial and test, and then look at how we can bring them within the organisation. But for me in particular, I suppose it's the whole concept as we connect our cities, our people, our infrastructure, as we connect everything, it's about the data, and it's about real-time connected and data-driven cities. So what's the point in having all these connections and Internet of Things and all these new technologies if we don't do cool stuff with the data? So, yeah.
Brilliant. No, they're fantastic. And as Mike was talking, well, all the speakers are saying we've got an awful lot of data these days to do something with. So we'll get into that, what we can do with it and why. Peter, please welcome, and please explain what you're up to and what your connection to this is.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So yeah, my name is Peter Sueref. I'm the CTO and co-founder of a new tech startup called Empirisys. And we are looking at data science solutions in the high hazard industry area. And we're trying to improve process safety. So we're trying to get all this kind of unstructured data that exists in industry, make some sense of it, and hopefully improve safety outcomes and make the workplace a better place to be. Before that, I was data science director at Centrica for a few years, and I worked in data pretty much my whole career. I was on the Digital Review of Wales Advisory Board. I'm on a few other kind of industry boards, looking at how we can make best use of our data in Wales.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter. Really interested to see what your contribution is to this as well. And finally, we have our CTO, Mike, who I was giving the keynote earlier. So I'll let Mike sort of just reintroduce himself in some respects and what he thinks is the connection to all this and why we're interested in this topic of smart information.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Carwyn. I'm Mike, very much a futurist and a bit of a tech whisperer, I guess, in some ways. I like to look at what's happening in the future and try and predict to a certain extent what's happening. I'm an honorary research fellow at the Nuclear Futures Institute at Bangor University, as well as being the CTO here. And I'm very much about how we manage huge chunks of data very quickly across a vast number of networks and how we make people actually get some value from all of that. After all, a lot of companies have a huge investment in data, and perhaps it's the most underutilized resource that they have.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. So we titled this about sort of going back to what Mike was talking about there. It's about the value of doing all this. Can I ask you, I'll go around each of you in turn to sort of ask the question of, we have the information, we have the data, we've collected that. How do you see this connecting to, I gave an introduction at the beginning, sort of focusing on the value of what we can get out of this for people. What's your take on the value of doing this in terms of what people can get out of it? So Mark, if I ask you first, from your perspective, what's the real value proposition here of actually doing something with this data?
Yeah, great question. I think that the reason why it's important for us as well is that, we recognize that the pace of innovation and technology and the ability to collect and, manage information to then create actionable insights is just at the core of what we're developing right now at Spontza. So, Matt made a fantastic point about real-time intelligence and centralizing information. Mike also made a really brilliant point about transforming the way we all search for information that we want and need as and when we want and need it. So this ultimately talks to everything that we're developing right now. With us building a platform across the likes of sport, lifestyle, culture, which is ultimately designed to connect consumers, businesses, brands to what they need, audiences that they want to connect with based on their objectives, goals and needs. So using that information is fundamental to the success of a lot of the people that we talk to. And the challenge, as we know today, is, there's so much information out there that, again, a lot of the people that we talk to, and they know the information's there, they just don't know how to find it because it's not in one central place. So, my vision is to try and change that and to use, data and smart information to support the growth, I guess, on scale, across all levels, from the SME space to grassroots and not-for-profit, right through to brands and organizations that are recognized globally. So, fundamental to all of that is the data and the use of smart information to bring all that together.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I'll come back to Matt and Mike at the end of this, because I think the other speakers have got an interesting take on this in terms of, you're obviously directly connected to the audiences in particular there. So, Jamie, if I could ask you the same question, you're doing a lot of stuff over there in Dublin and smart cities. What do you see the real value propositions of this are? What's the benefits that you're seeing, or why we should be doing this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think, we've grown, I suppose, a smart city program over the last 5-6 years, a team of 1-2 to a team of 25. I mean, it's kind of almost aligned with the growth of the technology and the opportunities. But what's really exciting, I guess, is, we have a lot of legacy stuff, legacy systems, and they're old kind of proprietary systems, and they've got their challenges and how you get data out of them. But what's really exciting is, I suppose, the rapid growth of Internet of Things, low power devices, and what's possible that wasn't possible 3, 4, 5 years ago in terms of sensing the environment, sensing the quality of the air, flooding. It's just amazing what's coming through in terms of the technology evolution, and really what we're seeing is all this data coming in across different silos, but ultimately what we're trying to do is deliver better services, better outcomes for our citizens, whether it's real-time data on flooding and rainfall that can help us respond quicker and faster in a more agile way, or whether it's hyper-local data on things like air quality, to understand the impact of congestion and traffic on local communities. So we're really, I suppose, on a journey in terms of the smart city movement, from like a hype kind of curve back 3-4 years ago to where where we are now, it's real. And now that it's real, we're starting to kind of grapple with some of these questions. We have all this data, there's the so what. I mean, now that we have a project on smart bike lights where we have thousands of people with these bike lights, and it collects data on potholes in the city with a company called C-Sense. And do you think the road traffic guys are excited about getting all this data on where the potholes are? So with data comes responsibility, and then how are we going to change how we work, what we do, the decisions we make? So it's kind of less about data, but about culture and transformation. So I think we're in this interesting kind of crossover where the city and, I suppose, its different silos are now, what are we going to do with this, and how are we going to make sure we make better decisions? Whereas citizens now can almost kind of put these sensors out in their gardens or collect data in a way that was once the privilege of cities. So you're kind of getting this interesting dynamic where communities and citizens are empowered with data, pushing cities to make better decisions. So I think we're in it's a really exciting space, but again, there's lots of challenges, and some of the discussions today, we're really looking at those and how we can, I suppose, address them and deliver. I suppose what we want to deliver is really cool outcomes for our services and citizens and our cities.
Brilliant, thank you, Jamie. Peter, I'll go to you next. I just want to get a feel for why we're doing all this. So, from your perspective, Peter, what do you see the value proposition? Why are we doing this in question?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give a couple examples that I think might be informative. I guess everybody knows about the Challenger shuttle disaster in the 80s, right? We've all heard of that, and we know the cause of that. There was an O-ring that froze in sub-zero temperatures and caused a blowout, and the Challenger shuttle exploded. So we know that happened. We know there's this physical cause, but we also know in the accident investigation that followed that there are a lot of cultural causes and communication causes. We know there's a culture of secrecy. There was a time pressure. There are all these kind of other factors that weren't physical that actually were just as vital in causing the blowout as the frozen O-ring. Now, this was in the 80s, so most of the information was not digitalized. Almost all of it was paper files. And the accident investigation was, a bunch of people combing through tons and tons of documentation. Let's move forward 20 years and let's think about something like Deepwater Horizon, say. So Deepwater Horizon, the oil rig that exploded as a blowout. Oil rig exploded, caused a lot of death, a lot of devastation, biggest ever marine oil spill. This happened in 2010. This happened, when we got digital records. And again, there was a physical cause, but there were also a lot of underlying cultural causes that we can look at. So safety inspections weren't there, documentation was incomplete. There was, again, kind of lack of communication. There's a really great Wikipedia page on it. You can kind of comb in and understand all the different causes. But at Empirisys, we have got a kind of background in data science, but also in high hazard safety. So my co-founder is the chief engineer of Centrica and has worked in high hazard safety and has been involved in a serious accident himself. So the two of us together have felt that actually there's a big opportunity to make workplaces safer by looking at the digital data that is available. A lot of it is unstructured and a lot of it is kind of difficult to understand using kind of traditional methods, but it's all there. And you can understand things like, are there communication issues? Have safety logs not been filled out correctly? Is fatigue apparent in workers? So all these different cultural factors and kind of non-physical factors actually are just as critical when an accident happens. So at Empirisys, we're trying to pull these things together and try to build a model of when error-likely situations are likely to happen, likely to cause incidents. So we think there's a really clear value proposition. Hopefully we're going to save lives, stop accidents from happening, better outcomes from workers in high hazard industry. The difficult bit is really this hasn't been done in a big way before, and we're trying to pull together lots of disparate data to try to make some kind of model about the world, which is, I think Mike talked about this, it's inherently very difficult to understand factors that are apparent that could cause incidents. So I really love the example where you talked about predicting the election outcome, and then Trump got COVID and so on, and you can't really understand everything that happens in the world. It's just impossible to predict in a meaningful way. So rather than doing that, we're trying to figure out where are there these red flags we need to look for, where is there likely to be a problem that could lead to an incident. So yeah, we think the value proposition is really clear. The market is ready for it, but more important than that, there's the opportunity that we can actually have a really huge, meaningful impact on hopefully a lot of saved lives.
Brilliant, thank you, Peter. There's three sort of examples there from the three of you, and I'll take this to Matt and Mike now. So to carry on that question of where we get the value from this, so please add to that. But then I'd like to sort of take it back again now to look at the challenges that go with that. So now we've heard about the kind of things we are collecting and why. What's the value from your point of view, Mike and Matt, and what are the challenges and that this raises as well? If we bring that across there. So Matt, if you go first and see what you think.
Sure. Yeah. So to me, this massive amount of data that we have now, we've always had this data. It just hasn't been digitized. A lot of these insights that we have, if we had someone that could sit there and just work specifically on these problems, absolutely, we could have kind of a watchdog for many of these safety issues and stuff like that. But we just don't have the capacity. So then we come over to this now, this digitized approach, right, where we can automate it. And the challenge there is actually speed. We've been able to leverage these insights for quite a while, but the speed hasn't been there. And I'm talking about this from a Dgraph perspective, where when we talk to users, they may be solving these problems, but when they solve them, they're too late. Kind of like assessing, an airplane crash after the fact. If we could detect this type of thing and action it at the time, we might be able to improve safety and improve improve the likelihood of something catastrophic happening. So to me, speed is kind of paramount, and now we're getting to that level. And you know what? The amazing part is some of these things that we look at as kind of hindrances to our modern society, like social networks, where we see it as a time suck. actually the technologies being developed there are what are leading some of this stuff forward, because they do have massive amounts of data, and they're being able to prove that you can do this in, you know, almost instantaneous fashion. And we can now start to roll that type of technology out to improve safety, improve efficiency, all of these types of things that we're getting from maybe technologies that weren't necessarily meant to solve those problems initially. Now we can use those bigger solutions to solve some of these more pressing problems.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. You're in a position of seeing a lot of these different industries, I'm sure. And Mike, we're in a similar position. What do you think in terms of the main value across our clients and then into the challenges as well?
Because I'm positively ancient, I think I remember the world before mobile phones and all these sorts of things. And for me, I was a big champion and advocate for bringing mobile data into common use. And the challenges that we had at that point were people were always saying, well, what's the value of me having a mobile phone that is connected to the internet? And actually, there was quite a large battle at that point to get people to use mobile phones that were genuinely connected. And we sort of saw the evolution of technologies it went through into now virtually everybody has a camera, has a phone, and is posting thousands and thousands of images every few minutes, whether that's a pothole in the street or whether it's of their family and where they are at the moment. And I think that the value, therefore, is sometimes difficult to see, but what we're actually getting to the point now saying we have all of this data, we're collecting it from all of these things, whether that's a smart device or whether it's a mobile phone, whether it's through the more conventional means of people physically putting data into devices. What we're actually now just starting to see is the merge of the operational stuff with the experience stuff, pulling that together and just beginning to see the evolution of the result of pulling all of this information together. And what we're actually seeing now are tangible benefits, the reduction in the carbon footprint, the more economic way of being able to pull information back, the speed at which we can retrieve information, the speed at which we can link and keep data in place. We don't necessarily need to make loads and loads of copies of this. So part of my mission, if I can put it that way, is to get people to get real value from data, not shove it in an Excel spreadsheet and then mangle it a bit, but actually to get real-time insight and to get real-time value out of that information. If I know, for example, that somebody has just reported into a hospital with a suspected case of COVID, that actually gives me an awful lot of information. Here we have where they came from. We know where they've been and what the touch points are within a hospital. And we can pull that data together to help predict what's likely to happen. Here, data is really key to helping us do some very, very useful things. It improves safety. It improves the general sort of population, if you will. It helps with getting people to and from events. It helps with reducing the amount of time that we spend in car parks that are the M6 and the A55s of this world. I come back, I think both Peter and Jamie, you both mentioned that there's a responsibility to looking after this data and making sure that it's right and making sure that what we're actually getting back from that insight is correct all the time. It's very easy to jump to conclusions, and I think that we've got some real value, but we have to temper that with making sure that we manage that risk too.
Brilliant. I think I will come back to that responsibility and ethics in particular towards the end. I think that's a really, really important point there. So a few things came up there, sort of common points. The timeliness of the data sort of came up there a lot. So maybe open it up as nobody in particular, anybody wants to step forward. How important is this timeliness of the information? Can you think of examples, Mark, in terms of connecting to the audiences at the right time? Peter, the safety aspects are obviously, there's massive time critical elements in there, and Jamie, I don't know what the timely aspects of smart cities might be. Anybody got any comments on that aspect of it?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think in our space, COVID in particular has gone some way to transform in the way a football club will interact with its fans. They've almost been forced to adopt a digitalized approach in terms of the way they engage, the way they communicate with their fans and with audience, but also the way they communicate and add value to their sponsors and their partners, for example. And when you then think about sponsors and partners are constant in their search to connect with the audiences or niche audiences that they can then interact with, ultimately to sell their products, or whether that's a corporate social responsibility campaign that they're looking to push out. But what is fundamental, again, to all of that is real-time information and real-time audience psychometric demographic data is what we see today brands are constantly searching for. So the more that we can surface real-time information to, whether it's a consumer or whether it's a football club or whether it's a brand that are specifically searching for what they want and need in a particular moment, real-time information then becomes incredibly important. So, you know, that's how we're taking it. That's where I see the world moving to throughout the next, 12 to 24 months in particular, for brands wanting real-time information. The challenge is, how do we make it easily accessible for many?
Jamie, obviously that's connecting to the customer base in a specific sense in Mark's case, but obviously you've got a customer base of sorts within the city. How important is the timeliness of this in terms of, have you come across examples of where this is important?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many good examples. I guess from the most basic one, as cities rolled out real-time passenger information for public transit and every type of mobility service, having information where the service is in real time obviously encourages people to use it more. So that's been huge from a citizen perspective. I guess from an environmental perspective, I talked about where the rain is hitting hardest, or the river is about to flood. That timeliness is absolutely critical as we kind of see more extreme weather events in our cities. Another nice project that we're working on, looking at the whole area of digital twins and emergency response. So, fire brigade comes under Dublin City Council, but if you're responding to a critical incident where maybe there's hazardous waste or hazardous scene, being able to kind of visualize the layout and understand then what's they're connected in real time in terms of chemical levels and things like that. So this type of having information when you need it at the right time is absolutely critical. From a city perspective, you mentioned COVID. Really, COVID has pushed cities around the world into thinking more about, what's the busyness of my city centre, my public space, my public realm. And all of a sudden, all these sensors that were there that people weren't doing a whole lot with on pedestrian counts and, traffic sensors, all of a sudden, these are really important sensors. I think London did a lot of cool stuff with integrating their camera network and real-time data stuff to understand this busyness impact. So I think, timeliness is absolutely key, but I think obviously it varies across the different types of use cases, and then also you need to be equipped to be able to respond effectively as well. No point having the data, and actually in some cases, I'll give you an example of a project where actually life buoys, ring buoys, we have a big issue in Dublin where a lot of them go missing, particularly after stag parties, and get thrown into the river. So one of the projects we're rolling out is a little connected sensor in the life buoy, so when it's there or not there. And then it raises the question, so if you know that, is it better off not knowing that if you're not going to be able to replace it quickly? So with data becomes responsibility, and then also questions get raised in terms of you need to be accountable for how you respond then. So sometimes we find pushback that departments or business owners would prefer not to know that information, which is kind of crazy, but that's the nature of people, isn't it, and change.
Yeah, no, that relevance point, I'll come back to that one as well. So Peter, and obviously the timeliness in your case, I'm sure is quite critical. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely, and just to build on the bit that Jamie mentioned, because I think that's key. I've certainly encountered some situations where it's possible to kind of overload people with data. If your whole aim is real time just for the sake of being real time, then actually that's probably quite a negative thing, because we're all dealing with quite a lot. Let's pick a trivial example: our inbox, our email inbox, or Teams, or Zoom, or Skype, or all these different kind of ways of people reaching you in real time. I probably prefer that was asynchronous. I'd like to go back to a world where people could send me letters or memos and I could respond to them at my leisure rather than having to deal with them there and then. So I think it's a slightly double-edged sword, aiming for real time just for the sake of it. However, there are some really good, strong use cases where we should absolutely aim for real-time data. Again, in my previous role at Centrica, we were looking at energy, and we were looking at smart grids, virtual power plants, routing of energy, routing of demand, and even again, a kind of more trivial example. So while I was at Centrica, we moved from this kind of dumb meter to smart meter, where we were getting 4 meter readings a year, once every quarter, to potentially get a meter reading every 15 minutes. So that changes the whole picture. The understanding you've got about a customer and their energy spike and their demand is completely different. Things you can do with that data are completely different, and that's led to lots of kind of in-home devices where you can manage your energy and so on. But on a kind of broader macro scale, that lets you manage demand across the whole country and do some really clever stuff. So clearly, there's a massive kind of commercial and economic value to doing that. But then in my current role at Empirisys, there's clearly a massive amount of value in getting up to the second data, so you can understand, is there risk here? Do we need to do something about risk? Do we need to action it? I think the tightrope that we're walking is, at what point do you alert people to a risk? And this is probably the same across other industries. At what point do you alert a customer, a client, an operative, a human being essentially, to this new piece of information that you've got in? So you need to make some kind of call. You've got to make a model ultimately that kind of makes a decision for you. And this is the really tricky aspect that I think is probably going to be one of the future problems that we deal with. And I mean that societally. To what point do we allow machines to start making decisions about what we see and how we consume it? And if we do talk about ethics, then we can talk about advertising, and in particular the kind of very thorny ethical problem we've got in exactly the same area. How much autonomy do you give to a machine to allow you to advertise to you?
That's going to fit really nicely into the next topic, actually. So we'll go into. So I want to go back to Matt and Mike again with the timeliness, and obviously it's a really important thing for Dgraph, and it's something that Mike mentioned as well, the timeliness. And maybe the next topic we go through is sort of the appropriateness, the relevance. It's double-edged coin, double-edged sword of sort of getting it right versus getting it wrong, and the implications. But I've got some examples of that I'll bring in. So let's go to Matt. Sort of the timeliness. If we close off this topic with you and Mike now, how important is that?
Sure. I think so. For me, I look at it from an infrastructure perspective, right? So from a technology infrastructure perspective, it is now probably just as cost efficient to build something that has real-time capabilities, whether we program it to give us notifications right away or whatever. I mean, like Peter said, we have notifications going off like crazy. When do we actually alert somebody? Well, it's better for us to have that capability to be able to alert somebody and have it real time, as opposed to building a system that's going to cost the exact same that then we later need to basically remediate to be able to accommodate a real time. So to me, the timeliness thing is everything that we can do can be real time. So let's build the infrastructure to do that. And then we can control that lever on when we want to actually leverage that real time or whether we don't want to. So that would be my kind of stance on it.
Brilliant. Mike?
Okay, there's some really interesting comments. Jamie, I love the fact that people don't want to know sometimes that things are going wrong. A few years back, I was involved with the 999 management systems for various police and fire services, and we were putting sensors into the roads. And we got to the point there where if something happened on one of the major trunk roads, the traffic would come to a stop. And just having a moving traffic sensor was such a simple thing that we knew instantly that there'd been an accident. We were scrambling the police and the emergency services way before we started getting the first calls coming in. So the timeliness of data there, we could get the real-time feed straight into the 999 environments there to be able to respond to it. And talking of that, we actually also had to deal with exactly the opposite of that, where we were having way too much information. I was part of the planning for the Olympics and the strategy for the mobile data networks. And one of the biggest issues that we had was that if there'd been a major incident at one of the stadia around the events, we would end up being saturated with a number of people meaning to do well, but actually hitting 999. And that got to the point where we would have so many people calling the 999 networks that they would be completely saturated. So people meaning well were actually causing real harm and chaos on the networks. And we see this again with the news services. So quite often we'll get a news alert that 10 people have been killed in an accident somewhere, then there's 18, and then there's 2. And the variability of that data is coming from people that are just picking up stuff. And again, we come back into this echo chamber of the social media feeds. They start pushing this out on social media, and for some reason, people gravitate to the worst version of that event and then tweet that out and retweet it. And at that point, we end up with, again, a lot more coming into that area and trying to resolve the problem than perhaps are actually necessary. So resourcing and managing resources actually has a direct tie-in to things like the speed of response and the speed of data. If we can understand how severe an event is, we don't need to scramble 45 fire engines and 6 million ambulances for a 2-car prang on a trunk road somewhere. So I think it's making sure that we're getting again, it's that insight piece. We need to make sure that we're understanding what these things are actually telling us, and we can separate out the noise from the real data.
So that brings another sort of twist to this, the implications of what we're doing as well. So that fits in with this sort of appropriateness and relevance and implications. So I think, that's obviously where we should go next. So I've got an example that I think Mark will like, of what can go wrong if you don't join these bits of information together. Last week, European football, a lot of news was actually focused on not the game, but actually what happened in a press conference. And you had two players. Ronaldo was one of them, and Pogba was the other. They moved the bottles that were in front of them. One is a health fanatic, and he moved the Coca-Cola. The other one is a practicing Muslim, and they moved the beer out of the way. So obviously, there's an awful lot of data out there that should have avoided this potentially. And that's sort of an example of how inappropriate something can be if you don't connect the data. Mark, what's your take on that? Relevance, appropriateness, and implications.
Yeah, you absolutely have took the words straight from my mouth, Carwyn. So if you think about that situation with Cristiano Ronaldo at the Euros, obviously moving the Coca-Cola bottle then resulted in Coca-Cola's share price dropping by £4 billion, the action of one individual. So I guess in hindsight and on reflection, had Cristiano Ronaldo had some control over that process, I guess, or if he could have control over what he wanted to associate himself to, then that situation could have been avoided. So if that does not magnify the importance of putting the control in the hands of the person who wants access to information that they want and need when they need it, I don't know what does. I think, the flip side to that, there was also, I think there was a football manager, I don't recall which one it was, that actually picked up the Heineken bottle or the Coca-Cola bottle and drank it. So what that is, again, magnifying for us is every single audience is different. We all have different needs. We all want different things. And so having control of what we want to interact with is just crucially important in today's world, in particular when it comes to, data and having the right things presented to us. But yeah, it was fascinating that the actions of just one individual in a grand scheme of 8 billion on the planet could reduce a share price by £4 billion of one of the biggest brands in the world. So yeah, it was interesting to see.
The key point there is that that is well known out there, but the dots hadn't been joined, and you have a fairly trivial example, perhaps. I mean, Pogba, that could be quite offensive to it, I'm sure. But to extend this out to maybe Peter next, is the relevance, impact, and appropriateness. How's your take on the responsibility that goes with those, with all this smart information we're managing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would just say that Ronaldo is slightly hypocritical, having been sponsored by Coke earlier in his career. So obviously happy to take the money when he needed it, and then make a social point when he doesn't. But that's by the by. Is still massively interesting. I think my kind of background into this has been really coloured by the kind of events as I was growing up. So when I was 6 months old, my dad had a car accident, went through the windscreen of his Ford Capri, and he was basically blinded for the rest of his life. He was working as a quantity surveyor at the time, and that in the 80s, this was 1981, that was not on the cards anymore. If you're blind, you can't do that. You can't do that job. And then slowly through the 90s, kind of early 90s, technology started advancing. Personal computers became a thing, and then screen readers became a thing, and kind of Zoom text became a thing. And all these technological innovations led to my dad being able to get a job again, which was, obviously great. And I've seen, I think, really starkly, the good that technology can do. There's clearly a huge amount of social value, of benefit to individuals, to families, to countries. You can look at some examples of countries that are using digital technology to kind of raise themselves up a bit. But at the same time, I think we are probably facing quite a big ethical dilemma. As I mentioned, there's this idea about how far do you let machines kind of make decisions for you. And then I think kind of beyond that, you can look, I think yesterday it was announced that NHS England have published a data strategy. They're talking to organizations like Palantir, who have got, who knows what kind of intentions with our data. So I think there's, I'm not going to answer this question because I don't think it's answerable right now, but apart from to say there are a huge kind of social and much more widespread kind of decisions we need to make. We need to make these decisions. This is Wales Tech Week. We need to make these decisions in Wales as a country. We need to have a kind of coherent understanding of what are the trade-offs that we're making in terms of data, in terms of the capability we can bring. So I'm an optimist. I think that actually we will see huge improvements, and particularly for health. COVID, case in point, over the last year, we've had massive innovations that have been driven a lot with digital technology. So my optimistic hat says, yeah, let's hope for the best, and this should all pan out nicely. But at the same time, I think we need to be really aware of the kind of trade-offs we're making and the other players that might not have such benign intentions.
Thank you, Peter. I mean, your point there, I don't think we can answer this in any kind of short amount of time. Jamie, you have an entire city that has all sorts of conflicting ideas and needs and opinions. But what do you think of this topic?
Yeah, I mean, it's a super important topic. I think trust in data as well is really important. I suppose as a city who manage public realm, public space, we have to make sure that just because we can collect data or use technology doesn't mean that we should. And I'm thinking about camera-based technologies, facial recognition, I suppose algorithmic bias. There's all sorts of issues, and then sharing data and privacy concerns. So I think we need to be proportionate in terms of how we use data. We also need to be conscious of the fact that if we get this wrong, we lose trust in our citizens and communities. So it kind of damages the long-term viability of smart city programs, of technology investment. So we just need to be really careful that every project we do, and we do this, we look at why we're collecting data. Is it the right thing to do? Maybe an example, recently we evaluated the whole area of Wi-Fi, MAC address. We decided we're not going to collect any MAC address data off Wi-Fi networks. Firstly, it's not particularly useful in a public realm setting. There's other ways of doing it, but there's so much advertising in public space and tailored advertising. I mean, a lot of people have issues with this stuff, and there's coalitions of cities. Amsterdam, one leading the way in this, where we're really starting to look at charters and look at how cities can come together to make sure that data is being collected in the right way. And we need to be careful. And obviously, it's a hot topic in the whole tech world. So we can talk all day about this one. And then drones, another big area that we see huge potential is just drones. I mean, unlimited the potential of drones for cities. But trust is a big thing. As we see a proliferation of drones, if we don't have the trust of our communities and citizens, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's an entire session in its own rights to talk about the ethics of this particular topic. So we need to close off fairly soon now. So maybe a quick comment from you, Matt, and we'll go back to Mike to wrap this up a little bit. With great power comes great responsibility, Matt. How are we gonna, as engineers, gonna deal with all this?
Yeah, I think honestly, it just comes down to being realistic about how data can be used, and making sure that we as folks in technology are for us, I think we know the implications. I think it's people who are less aware of technology need to be educated so that they can also help to make those kind of unanimous decisions. And there's certain areas, obviously certain parts of the world can leverage data in different ways for good and for bad. So just making sure that everyone is aware of those consequences and the positives out there, I think is super important.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. Mike, I'll let you wrap up. I think we've got a few minutes just before we have to close off the session. Same kind of topic, great power, responsibility. What is our responsibility with this?
Actually, I forget who just said it, but trust. I think it was Jamie. Trust. You have to trust the data. Therefore, our responsibility is to make sure it's right. It's coming from the right source. It's the authoritative source. I said that earlier on, and that we are doing the right things with it. One of the key things here for me, bit of blatant salesmanship for Dgraph here. One of the things that I really like about Dgraph is that the transactions within the database are Jepson tested. To those that are outside of the tech world, that probably means nothing. But what it really means is that if I'm going to put a transaction in on a system, I can guarantee that everyone who's looking at that system is getting that particular transaction completed and accurate. That's really key. And we should be applying that kind of principle across all of our systems here. If somebody's going to rely on our data, it's got to be right. And it's got to be delivered in the right way so that people actually understand what they're seeing. And that's a real tech challenge. How do we make this visualization nice? How do we make it pretty so that people want to use it? And how is it absolutely correct so that people can hang their hats on it?
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt and Mike. And I guess to be able to have that ethics debate that we can't really have here, we need to be able to trust the data to be able to know that we are actually having the right conversations. So absolutely. So I'll just wrap up there. Thank you so much to all of you, Mark, Matt, Jamie, Peter, and Mike for participating in this panel discussion. I'm sure the chat will carry on a little bit later. If anybody wants to catch up with people, please do so. Capventis, have got another session this afternoon. Sophie, can I just ask you the production team to swap in the slides? I just want to flag up what else is going on. If I put my screen up there, so if I go back there, bear with me. So that was our panel discussion, and just to flag up now, so oops, that was our panel discussion there. So thank you to all of you for participating in that. Do get engaged with us on the expo. All the panelists, I'm sure, are able to get in touch with them if you want to carry on any of the conversations. I just want to flag up that this afternoon we're carrying on some of our conversations that are focusing on the customer experience, the employee experience, the general experience economy. We're looking at that this afternoon, and there'll be more of these kind of examples of how we can make use of this information, be smart about it in a responsible way. So that's this afternoon. That's the agenda that we have for that this afternoon. So we've got a number of our Capventis colleagues speaking at that. We've got some customer stories as well from DNB and Sandvik, and Mike will be wrapping up the day at the end of the day. So thank you all for attending. Please do get in touch with all of us and reach out to the speakers, and we'll see you later this afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you so much to the production team as well for letting us and helping us put all of this on today.
Thank you for watching. Rewatch all of our sessions online. Thank you to our partners,